we have another reading, we have another parable from Jesus that, again, from a very cursory observation, would lead us to very incorrect calculations, or conclusions, I should say. So, the classic story of the rich man and Lazarus, and now the rich man is in anguish, and the poor man Lazarus is comforted. And so again, if we take a very cursory look at this, then we can come up with the idea that being rich sends you to anguish, and being poor gets you into heaven. Now, nowhere here does it say that the rich man was an evil man. It doesn't say, all it says, he lived in luxury every day. Okay? The only thing that we could possibly come to the conclusion about this rich man is it says, and he was longing to eat what fell from the rich man's table. The only even beginning of a clue. Equally so, we have no knowledge of Lazarus as the poor man. All it says is at the gate there was a beggar. His name was Lazarus. He was covered with sores. Doesn't tell us anything about his life, who he was. We don't know if he was a robber or a criminal, and then all of a sudden got beat up by his own gang, and now he's left here at the gate. So the very first thing we should do is not come to the conclusion, not come to simplistic childlike ideas that rich bad, poor good. Because that's not what Jesus is telling us here. Okay? So then what is Jesus telling us? What is this story? Two things. Well, much more than two things, but we're just going to focus on the two things. And the one is where he says, and now when Lazarus received many bad things, verse 25, he is now comforted here. So the first part is that what our lives are about is not the pursuit, as we would be told by secular society, of pursuit of all of the material things that we want. Again, not to say that material things aren't bad, but it is a preparation, our life is a preparation for us so that we may receive this comfort. All right? And the second thing is that the rich man says, all right, look, if I'm here, at least do me the favor and tell my family, because if they hear somebody from the dead, then surely they will change their ways. And lesson number 2 is Jesus' also statement that that will not work on regular human beings. Is that no matter how much you tell somebody and try to pass on your wisdom, most of the time they're not gonna listen. Okay? All of us in our businesses and our restaurants have tried to pass on to our staff, to our kids, to our family, the wisdom that we have learned through the anguish we have suffered. And the answer is, that was you, and now this is me. So I know that very well because there were many, many times in my youth where my father was trying to pass on important lessons that he learned. But me, being 18 years old, was already a man of the world and knew everything. So then I immediately told my dad, you don't know what you're talking about because that you were living in ancient times and I'm a modern person and so I know what is that I'm doing. Come many years later, those lessons now come back to me to haunt me and say, if you would have listened, then you wouldn't have gone into this same arena. All right, so part of the lesson here is for us to not only to mentor to one another properly, how do we mentor to that next generation, but also that we in turn can receive that in all humility and patience. And sometimes for us that's very difficult, especially if we are caught up in what society tells us is the right thing to do. And here in America, and I've heard me say this before, America is great, but the one thing it has that is anti-Orthodox is that it prides itself over individualism, over than respect for those who do have wisdom. Was we are told here in America that you have the right to do anything that you want and to think any way that you want, and no one can tell you different. This is not Orthodox, because there is someone who can tell you what is right and what is wrong. And that is, at the top is the church, meaning that God speaks through the church. And he also speaks to those who are in the Christian life, who are living and have experienced the difficulties and the struggles of life. And so we are called many times to honor that, to honor those elders and to have patience and to be able to listen. And this is what we're supposed to be receiving here. This is Jesus now telling us to us in this parable, speaking about people not listening to those who are dead. And so that brings us back to the first one, which is the idea of comfort. It is very difficult to be comforted in this world when the only thing that you're chasing are material things. The next best car, the next best house, the next best wife, the next best husband. Those very difficult when you are chasing those secular things. Again, those things are not bad in of themselves. But what we have to recall is, what is our life's purpose? As you've heard me say this before, I learned this lesson while at General Motors. Because while being an engineer there and being very involved in the work that I was doing, thinking that I was making a difference, I went to many funerals of the engineers who had died there. And the closing statement of their lives was a design that they had done, an engineering change that made them famous, a position that they had at General Motors. And I thought to myself, is this going to be what's going to be on my epitaph? Is this what people are going to remember me for? That I designed something that nobody cares about? And that is the problem with being too involved in the secular world, because they will not give you a prize. The famous saying at General Motors was, the gold watch or the car doesn't love you back. Only people do. And so the realization was that as good as my work was, what is the most important was my relationship with my fellow man. That's what this is here. Look around. You are all here not because you're here on some business idea or business plan. You are here gathered as a community out of love for one another and a love for our faith. In the end, this is what will matter. And it shows itself at our funerals. When we come to the funerals and see our church filled and we hear people saying beautiful things about the lives of our people who are here in our community. Not about what they've done in their lives, but how they have affected those. That's what brings us comfort. And this is the comfort that Jesus is talking about here. And I wanted to bring those 2 points forward about knowing what our purpose in life is and what true comfort means. And then secondly here is the fact that we need to somewhat erase or override that American concern for individualism and be more patient and more tolerant and listen more to those among us who do have experience and know what that true suffering in life has been, and learn then from that.